Welcome to LOL with Lindsay or Lillian. I'm Lillian Nave,
And I'm Lindsay Maslin.
and we are really happy to talk to everybody today about the Course Redesign Institute coming up at Appalachian State University. So that Course Redesign Institute is a way for our faculty to revamp, redesign, or design a new course. Lindsay, tell me your experience about course redesign.
Yeah, so the first time I did anything involving course redesign was several years ago, and I did it as a participant. I signed up, I saw the email, like I'm sure a lot of you guys did, and signed up, not totally sure what I was getting myself into. But it ended up completely changing the way I think about designing not only the course that I was focused on during the Institute, but all of my courses and just the way I think about my role as a teacher in general. And it was so exciting that I wanted to help out. And so ever since then, I've helped facilitate all of the institutes we've had. So I'm really excited to work with you guys and hopefully help you have a similar experience to the one that I had. What about you, Lillian?
I must say I've had so much fun every time I've had a chance to participate. And the first time I learned so much from you when you were presenting. So it's like a happy family over here.
Yeah.
But one of the big things that happens at Course Redesign is we're introduced to a book and a methodology about course design by Dee Fink in his book, Creating Significant Learning Experiences. And we go through a lot of it, and it's important that we talk about some of the beginning before participants show up, right? So that's why Lindsay and I thought we might discuss a little bit about significant learning experiences. What is a significant learning experience?
Yeah, I mean, what about you, Lillian, when you think about like your college experience, can you think of any things that you would label, like you as a student, that you would label as a significant learning experience?
Absolutely. I remember showing up on a Saturday morning for an art history kind of fun seminar experiment. And this was with a professor who I've had before and really enjoyed. And so I showed up on a Saturday morning and he gave us a personality test. And then he put us into different groups and gave us Legos and Lincoln Logs and Tinker Toys and said, design a city. And what was funny is he didn't tell us which group we were in, but 4 different groups designed cities. And we had, 45 minutes to do it. And at the end, he went through each one of them. And turns out I was in the group of very orderly people, and our city had a beltway like Baltimore or Charlotte, totally enclosed everybody. And then they had the really creative thinkers, and it was like an amoeba, branching out in all directions. And I thought, I learned so much, and it totally changed my way of thinking about art and planning and design. And it was something that 25 years later, I remember more than almost any other time in a classroom setting. So how about you?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that comes to mind, I was taking a sociology class, social inequality, and we did an activity that I've since heard a lot of people using to really help people understand the nature of social inequality from lots of different lenses. So we did
Sorry about that.
All right, I'll do it again. Yeah, so I remember this one activity from a sociology class to help us understand the nature of social inequality, which we had been learning about in an academic way. But then we all left the classroom, went outside to a big field, and all stood in a line. And the professor said, take a step forward if you've never had to do blank, if you've never had to worry about where your next meal is going to come from. Take a step forward if you've always felt comfortable in et cetera. And so it went through all the different ways in which you could feel inequities in terms of social justice. And then, of course, by the end, you kind of had this map of privilege on the field. And that really stuck with me, mostly because it was uncomfortable because I was kind of in the privileged chunk of the field. So it wasn't even necessarily like a warm, fuzzy experience, but something that really totally changed the way I viewed my position in the world.
Absolutely. Matt, and both of those experiences were really engaging. And that's
Yeah.
one of the things that Dee Fink talks about is an engaging experience is significant and something that's um, has energy or high energy to it, where students are participating and they're collaborating. So, and actually for both of us, lasting impact. I remember it, we won't say how long ago we were in college, but let's just say it's a long time that we can remember those learning experiences. So, so one of the things that we are really thinking about is how is it that education, how these classes, how is it that we are changing and can provide these learning experiences for our students? Because a lot of my other classes, and most of it was sitting in desks or in a large recitation hall and listening to lectures, and I enjoyed that, but it was very passive. But I can't really tell you too much about that, what I learned during those times.
Totally. I mean, it was funny because when you first started giving your art history example, I was listening and nodding, but secretly I was also going, oh, shoot, like I didn't have an example that came to mind immediately. And I think that's because of what you were just saying, that so much of my college experience was lecture oriented, which made a lot of sense because when I was in college, Google was not ubiquitous. It was effortful in order to be able to actually just locate knowledge. Mm-hmm. And now people are just so used to Siri and everything. You have a question, you get it answered immediately. That wasn't what it was like when I was in college. So it might have been valuable to have people kind of giving me the knowledge in that really nice distilled form of a lecture. But today we do have Google. And so it makes you think about the value of some of the ways maybe we were taught compared to other potentials.
Yeah, so instead of memorizing, we really are relating to others, or how do we use that information? If we can pull it up on our phone, does it really matter that I know the date that the Sistine Chapel was painted? Not really, but I should know the significance of it, right? And how to use that knowledge. That's sort of the new school is, how do we use that information? Also, what wasn't as important, let's say, or a focus was, in college, there was a lot of conformity, a lot of cultural uniformity. You kind of sit and listen and you don't make many waves and you got from the professor. And now the climate is really different. It's much more about diversity and cultural diversity and learning from others, learning from your peers. Man, I've learned so much from my peers that I'm hoping that we can do that in our own classes.
Well, totally. I mean, if you think about, they've done a lot of studies of employers and what they're looking for in future employees, and also what they feel like their most recent millennial employees or what have you are lacking. And it's never that they're lacking, factual knowledge that could have been relayed via lecture. It's always these more kind of like interesting skills, like what you were listing, Lillian, like getting along with others or thinking creatively or thinking divergently and critical thinking and all that stuff. It's almost never, oh, they didn't know this factual stuff, which makes us really think about, how does that mean we should change our teaching in order to meet the needs of yes, their future employers, but also just well-rounded citizens.
Yeah. So I think we've got some change. Change is happening. There's no way, right? We can stop the change. So how is it that we can meet the needs of our diverse students and get them ready for a world in flux, as Kathy Davidson has called it in the New Education, but they're going into a really different world. How can we prepare them? So, whoa, Dee Fink has an idea, doesn't he? He comes up with a whole different way to think about what makes a significant learning experience. And he's got this kind of atom-like diagram with electrons, I think of electrons traveling around a nucleus of significant learning. And each one of those, he says, is really important in creating a course that will have lasting impact. And I think if we kind of introduce those concepts, that's going to help everybody who's coming into the Course Redesign Institute to start thinking about their their courses. So why don't we start maybe with that foundational knowledge or foundation knowledge, and what does that mean in his significant learning model, you think?
What do I think it means?
Yeah.
I think it means in some ways a lot of what the old school teaching was accomplishing. It's that very basic level of transfer of facts from maybe one person or one source to another, and the transfer is usually from some expert to the novice to the learner. Yeah. So the cool thing is that Dee Fink doesn't get rid of that. He's not saying that it's not important to learn foundational knowledge, but just that look at all of the other little electron paths, and that I love that. I hadn't really thought about it as electron paths. I like that. But how if you look at all the other paths, it's like, oh, that's just the first one, but we've got 4 or 5 more that we could think about to really reach that significant learning. Because one way I like to think about the significant learning is if I were to run into my students like in the grocery store in a few years, what would I hope that they would say they learned from me?
Right.
And they need the foundational knowledge to get to the other stuff, but that's probably not it. And so I think we can start there, but maybe not stay there. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. You bring up a hilarious point to me, is that on Monday, when I came into campus, I stopped by Publix and I got a sandwich and I ran out, and at my checkout was one of my former students. And she said to me, "Hey, do you still get fired again?" Because I do something in the class where they have to determine what to do with an artwork if I had been fired. And I actually pretend get somebody else to fire me. And she remembered it from 2 years ago. Now, does she remember exactly why we did that exercise? I'm not entirely sure, but she did remember the first thing she thought of when she saw me as I was paying for my sandwich. But yeah, so knowledge is what we thought was the whole course, but it turns out Dee Fink has some other things for us to think about. And usually what follows that foundational knowledge is how do we apply that? So his second electron path there, or part of significant learning, is application. And so things that we might think about there are what skills do we want our students to have? What sort of critical thinking skills? How are they going to approach situations? How are they going to manage complex projects? How will they use the theory that you're introducing in other ways or later on in life? So a lot of times in Gen Ed, and that's where I teach, we are talking about critical thinking skills. So it's not just can you remember names and dates, but can you apply them and think about practical application, critical thinking, creative thinking. Those types of things go in application. What kind of applications do you want your students to have in your classes?
It differs based on the class and the level and kind of what my goals are for them. But one example is a class where I'm teaching future teachers, future public school K through 12 teachers. And it doesn't matter a ton to me whether or not they remember the theorists' names or like the vocabulary words. Mm-hmm. But what I want them to be able to do is if something doesn't go right in their future classroom, I want them to be able to fix it. And not just fix it based on intuition, but fix it based on what the research says actually works in that situation. And so for me, the foundational knowledge is just kind of there, but what I really care about at first is whether or not they can even apply it. So that would be an example from my class.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like we're building this out, and you've got to have some basic knowledge, and then you need to apply it or be able to apply it in a bunch of situations. And then that takes us right to the third part of significant learning, which Dee Fink calls integration. And that's when we're thinking about interdisciplinary learning, or how does like the first 3 weeks of the class meld with the last 3 weeks of the class? Can you really build that web of knowledge and really have a deep and nuanced understanding of what's going on in the course?
Can you think of any examples from one of your classes where you try to intentionally bring about that integration?
Yeah, one of the things Good question, Lindsay. One of the things that I had to do, I think the third time I taught this class was I didn't integrate, I thought, the concepts because I really took a long time looking at a particular time in history about art theft. And we were looking at World War II and spending a lot of time there. And then it wasn't until second, third time I taught it, I thought, we really need to be applying that to what's happening today because it is. It's happening in the Middle East during wars with ISIS destroying artworks and saying, okay, so here's what you know in depth about how do we not just apply it, but integrate our understanding of how you deal with it to make decisions today about how we vote or how we can understand what's going on in the world. So that was definitely like first 3 weeks of the class, we were looking at one thing, and by the end, I'm trying to have it branch out so like the roots are growing and they can use that later on.
Yeah. I mean, and that's cool because you see how the only way to accomplish that is to move away from being so focused on foundational knowledge, because it forces you as the teacher who's designing the experience to think about what is the thing I really care about and what might actually be helpful for them after they leave me. They don't have me anymore. And so for them to be able to take something that was very historical and then learn how to apply that to something's happening now, hopefully they'll be able to do that after you're gone, which is a much more significant type of learning experience than for them to just be able to rattle off what happened in World War II.
Yeah, exactly.
Good job.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what we hope, right?
Yeah.
But the students that took it the first year, 2 semesters, they didn't get that. It's a work in progress, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then there's
Naked Man.
Yeah, I gotta throw in my art history. That's the Vitruvian Man, the measure of all things. For the human dimension. Now, this is when Dee Fink started throwing me off. Like, what? I've got to start caring about my students as humans, not just about their brains and how they can do on tests. And this was a big a threshold that I had to step over and say, yeah, this really, really matters.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because, I mean, I'm a psychologist by training, but I don't really love the touchy-feely stuff. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm a weird psychologist in that way. And so when I went through this course and I was like, oh, what? Yeah, when we get to this part, it was like, no, I like the rigorous academic stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But then if you think about it and what you really want somebody to take away from your course, it can still be rigorous, but it can also be really impactful at this human level, and having them learn about themselves and learn about how they relate to other people. There's lots of, self skills they could learn. One thing that comes to mind from my class is I was noticing that students were not putting enough time into studying. Like they weren't starting far enough back, or they weren't starting on a project with enough time. It was all happening the night before. And then as a result, they were not turning in quality work. And then of course they weren't getting good grades. And so one way to think about that is, well, that's their fault. They should know how to do that. Right. But after enough semesters of me realizing, well, they should know how to do it, but they don't know how to do it. So maybe I can help them know how to do it, and realize that they themselves are maybe not good at that kind of thing, and have that awareness for themselves, that self-awareness of like, oh, maybe I should do this. That helps them to understand themselves deeper. And then also, since I'm teaching a lot of future teachers, how they can help their students do that, and how what they're learning here helps them to kind of respect others. But that's not something I used to do. Just like you said, like the first couple semesters didn't get that. Yeah, same with mine. First couple years didn't get that.
Yeah. And now that I'm bringing that into how I plan or design an assignment or a course, I'm thinking, oh yeah, these are actual humans. I can't assign 400 pages on, spring break just because they have extra time. I need to be thinking about how they are as humans and what being a human means in coming to class. So that also means sometimes taking a break, a brain break, but a lot about, hey, we need to learn from each other, with each other, about each other along the way. But then there's this next thing that's right next to human dimension, which is caring, and has to do with like feelings and emotions. But it seems slightly different than the human dimension. because it's really focusing on, well, this is more your realm than mine, Lindsay, but the affective and behavioral parts of learning, that it's not just cognitive. Am I saying that in the right way? It's not just the
You
brain.
sound like a psychologist. You sure you don't have a psychology degree?
I play one on TV. No. But wow, understanding that there's emotions and other things that go into learning. And that's really why this young girl at the checkout remembered, because, oh, they felt terrible that day. And when I was so-called fired, because they were beginning to care about what was going on. So just Dee Fink is saying we really need to be thinking about how feelings and interests and values also influence the learning in a course.
And it's interesting too, because I think the first time I read that, I thought, well, this only applies to certain fields or certain topics. Like you can't care in math or something like that. That's probably what I thought. But I teach statistics courses. And I found that it's much more impactful when I figure out, it's harder when I figure out how to bring some of these, the human dimension, the caring stuff in there. So an example of this would be, I teach my students how they can use statistics to show when certain, how can I say that? To show when certain institutions are potentially racist, to be blunt about it. So for example, one thing we know is that kids in schools, kids of color, are more likely to get suspensions for identical infractions as white kids are.
Yeah.
And we can actually use statistics to see whether or not a number is statistically significantly different for the kids of color versus the white kids. And when they realize that, and in fact, we even do it for local schools, and when they're like, oh my gosh, it is true, nobody's trying to be racist, but it's showing up and we can prove that with numbers, that gets them to care about the field and shows them like, yeah, we can use math to make the world a better place, to care about others. So I think it's possible to inject this into any field.
Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised at how much that little electron path of caring made a difference in how I'm teaching. And then finally, there's this last one that Dee adds in here to create a significant learning experience that seems to have impact on all of the others during the course and then after the course in lifelong learning, which is learning how to learn.
So that makes me think about the last one, moving into Dee's idea of learning how to learn, which ideally, not only are they learning about how to care about your topic and the things we talk about right now and how to understand themselves, how they relate to others, all of the other kind of atomic pathways there, but we want them to have learned something valuable just about the learning process itself, so that if in the future they have to learn something that's maybe related to the topic you taught them, yet you didn't teach them about it because maybe it wasn't invented yet, hadn't happened yet, because that seems to be the pace at which knowledge is being created, that they can do that. And so trying to teach them those skills about how would I figure out the answer to something if I don't know the answer. Can you think of any examples of that from your classes?
Yeah, or how they can really realize that they're not done. Like, even though the course is over, there's always more to learn about really everything, how to be a lifelong learner. And so, hey, you do want to know about something. One of the things that we cover is research. How do you determine if you can trust something, right? How are you going to know who to vote for in the election if you don't know how to tell if a blog, author is any different than a scholarly journal? Right. So I think learning how to verify sources, how to, I need to make sure I hear at least 2 or 3 sides to this story, because if I just take the first thing that comes up on Google, I've already learned that having one source isn't enough. I need to verify, or I need to go a little deeper. So something like that, in my field, it might be about research or provenance, like the history of an artwork, but it also is in so many other things. Like, I'm not going to take that at face value, right? I'm going to learn how to dig deeper and to make a decision about something. Is something that hey, I'd say that's helpful after.
That's significant. That could be significant. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, and how to be self-directed, to also kind of measure out time so you're not waiting to the last minute. I deal with first year students, and that is something that we try to pace ourselves. And if they don't have it at the beginning of the semester, we're hoping that by the end they've learned some ways to give themselves time enough to digest information and make it their own. Those types of things. So, wow, Lindsay, this is a lot of new things, and I know it was kind of a big brain filling experience when I was a CRDI Institute person. So I think we'll just have to stop there for now, and ask everyone to kind of keep these things in mind.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you always have your goals set on significant learning, or I mean, even at APP in our strategic plan, we call it transformative learning. It's kind of the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so we as an institution have already decided that that is one of our priorities for our students, is to help them have these significant transformative experiences. And so if you're always asking yourself, how can I make that happen for my students? And keep the focus on that, then some of this other stuff becomes easier, because even though it sounds overwhelming to think about all these different dimensions, if it's focused on having them have kind of a life-changing, if possible, experience, then I think we can design those things, and Dee Fink structure can really just help us to kind of put some scaffolding around that laudable goal.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks. I've had a great time with LOL today.
We definitely laughed. Yeah. Out loud.
Yeah, we did. We had
both of us.
Yes, it was awesome. So thanks a lot, Lindsay. And we will see everyone at the Course Redesign Institute this May.
Bye.
Bye. All right, now I got to figure out how to I don't know.
How to stop it?
Stop the share, and then
we need to have this as like bloopers or something.